Hello everybody, my name is Mars. You can call me MG if you'd like, and today's video is me going over the 23 books that I said I wanted to read in 2023 and talking about if I actually read them. Now, we have a higher success rate than I expected, but it's still not fantastic. I did do a mid-year check-in about 6 months ago when we were halfway through the year, so feel free to check that out if you want to see where I was at that point in time. But now we're talking about the whole year. Did I read these books? It's either a yes or a no, except in some cases it's a sort of. We'll get there. I had two sections to this list. I had a few books and I had a few manga, so we are going to start at the top of the list with the books and just work our way down and talk about if I read it or not, and if I did, if I liked it. So let's just get going on that. So the first book on my list was Beowulf. This is a translation by E. Talbot Donaldson, and I did read this, and I had a really good time. I enjoyed the story of Beowulf. I had already read the first section back when I was in college. I think it was a different translation. I think it was the Seamus Heaney. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but like the most popular translation. So this is slightly different, but I still had a really good time. I like Beowulf a lot. Then we have two more books that I did read, but I unhauled these two because I was not a big fan, and they are Walden and The Dark Hills Divide, so two very different books. Walden is nonfiction, and it was just so dense. What I did get out of it, I enjoyed, but I didn't enjoy the whole book enough to keep it, so I put it in Free Little Library. Same as The Dark Hills Divide. That is a children's classic fantasy book, and it was just bland. I really just didn't enjoy it, so I'm like, I'll give this to Free Little Library, and hopefully a child will enjoy it more than I did. The fourth book on my list was The Water in the Wild by K.E. Ormsby. Look at this stunning cover. I read this, absolutely loved it. It's a children's book, but it's so good. I had a great time reading it, and I definitely want to continue on with the other two books in the trilogy at some point. I did mean to read book 2 later on in the year, because this was a kind of an early read if I remember correctly, but I just never got around to it. The next 4 items on the list were all Shakespeare, so I'm gonna consult that list because I don't remember off the top of my head what they were. We had Much Ado About Nothing, Richard III, The Taming of the Shrew, and Titus Andronicus. So I'm just gonna hold up Titus Andronicus because I didn't feel like pulling the rest of them off my shelf. I did read the other 3, did not read this one. I actually read The Taming of the Shrew and Much Ado About Nothing this month, so I'm just kind of sneaking them in right at the end. But Titus Andronicus is the only one that I did not get to of the 4 Shakespeare that I wanted to read this year. Then I picked up Roar by Cora Carmack, which was actually a book that was on my shelf for years and years and years and years, and I'm so glad that I did finally get to it, and I had a great time. Honestly, if you are on TikTok and you're a fan of the whole fantasy romance genre and you're liking all those TikTok books, this is one that you should check out. I'm not really in the TikTok sphere. I don't have TikTok. I just vaguely know from internet osmosis what's going on over there. So like I could be off about TikTok girlies liking this one, but I think it would be a big hit. So if that's your jam, you should check this book out. The next book that I had on my list was The Wizards of Once by Cressida Cowell. This was a middle grade high fantasy, and I started to read it and then I ended up DNFing it because I just wasn't vibing with it. I feel like when it comes to middle grade and children's books, it's very specific what I enjoy in them as an adult, so it just wasn't that for me. I didn't think it was bad, it just wasn't my thing, so I ended up giving this to my cousins actually, because I have 3 cousins who are between ages like 10 and 3 or 4. I don't actually know how old the youngest one is, but the oldest one can read it now and then pass it on to his brothers as they grow older. Then we have A River of Royal Blood by Amanda Joy, and this is another YA fantasy, and I did read this and I did really like it, and it has another book. It's a duology, and I've been looking online for the second book to kind of get cheap because I don't like paying full price for books. It's just a thing. I don't have a lot of money to spend on books, but I do like to buy them. But this is one where I've been trying to get my hands on the sequel since I read it because I did really, really have a good time with this. Then we have Permanent Record, which I started and then DNF'd and gave away because I did not have a good time. It's one of those books that was on my shelf for so long, I think I just aged out of it because it was a YA contemporary. At least I think it's YA. I don't actually know. I don't read a ton of contemporary, and especially not YA contemporary, so if I had read it when I first got it, I probably would have enjoyed it, but I just started reading, I got a couple chapters in, and I'm like, no thank you, so it came off my shelves. And then the last of the books on the list was The Alloy of Law by Brandon Sanderson, and I did not read this. I want to read the whole series because last November, I want to say, like November 2022, I binged all 3 books in the Mistborn trilogy and had a great time doing that. And so I wanted to do the same thing with this, which is Mistborn Era 2. I think it's called like Wax and Wayne is the name of the series because it's the 2 guys' names. But it's a 4-book series, and I still only own the first one. I have been looking for the rest at thrift stores, excuse me, have not been successful in finding them, so this one did not get read. And now we move into the manga section, and I'm going to start by talking about 3 of them all together, and they are Assassination Classroom, Monster, and Claymore, and these 3 were on this list because they are the only 3 manga on my 30 by 30 list, so I kind of just transferred them over, and I did not read these, asterisk. I didn't touch Assassination Classroom or Claymore, not at all. I did start Monster, so Monster has, I believe, 18 volumes, and I read the first one back in, I believe it was August. So I did start Monster. I had a good time, and I had every intention of reading the whole thing, but then that first one, so dark, so dense, I'm like, I need a little bit of a break from this, but I will be getting back to it. I will be finishing it at some point, hopefully sooner rather than later, but I started it, just did not finish it, and the other 2, I didn't touch at all. Then we have Blackguard, which I did start, did read the whole thing, finished it, absolutely loved it. There's 5 volumes. The ending, very, very sad, but like, I had a great time reading this. It's by the same mangaka as Devil's Line, which is another series that I really enjoyed, so I'm glad that I got to read this and continue my exploration of this mangaka's work. The next manga on the list is one that I actually own at least part of it physically, and that is Blade of the Immortal by Hiroaki Samura, and I'm currently reading this. I don't know if you can see my bookmark there. I'm about 3/4-ish through, so this is the first omnibus, so this has the first 3 volumes. There's 30 volumes total, or 10 different omnibus editions, so I am currently reading this. I don't think I'm going to read all 30 volumes by the end of the year because I'm filming this a little bit past the halfway mark for the month, and I'm going to keep reading this because I'm having a really good time, but I'm probably not going to finish it completely. This follows a man named Manji who is immortal and a girl named Rin who is not, and she's like, hey, I need your help to get revenge on the people who killed my family, and he's like, I don't really do that sort of thing. And then he looks at her, he's like, actually, you look like my dead sister. I'm gonna help you out. And it's really good. I've been having a great time. The art style, one of the most beautiful art styles I've ever seen in any manga. So I'm just having a fun time reading this book. After that on the list is Can't Stop Cursing You, which I did read. There were 4 volumes, I want to say, 4 or 5. And it started off really strong. I loved it so much from the get-go, and like the premise of like people using curses to kill other people, and then there's this whole agency who just investigates death by curses, and it follows this one guy who's doing that sort of thing. And then the last volume ends on such a big reveal of like who's been behind these specific curses this whole time, and then it just ends. It felt like the end of an arc, but it was called the final chapter, and there has not been more published since then, so it's the end of the manga, and that just completely threw me off. I hated that ending. Like, it didn't feel like an ending, so I did really enjoy that series right up until the end, and then that just kind of cut it off for me. I was not a fan of the end. Then we have Something's Wrong With Us, which I did not read. I almost did. Before I started reading Blade of the Immortal, I made a poll on Instagram like, hey, based on these emojis, what should I read next? And this was one of the options, but Blade of the Immortal won by a very slim margin. So I did not pick up Something's Wrong with Us, but it is one that I'm still interested in. Next on the list is Mob Psycho 100 by One, and I read this and I loved it. I cried. If you didn't know, Mob Psycho is my favorite anime, or one of my favorite animes, because I'm kind of bad at picking like absolute favorites, but it's definitely one of my top favorite animes, and so I'm like, I should read the manga, and I already own a couple of the volumes, so I did. Oh, the corner's chipped here. That's a little bit sad. Whatever. Anyway, I read it. I loved it. It's on par with the anime, I'd say. Sometimes when you read stuff, either the anime or the manga, you'd like a little bit more or less. This, I feel like they're pretty even. There is a couple of like pacing changes, I would say, like where some scenes are kind of cut shorter in the anime adaptation, other ones where they're expanded, and I feel like those were all good choices, but it didn't make this like version of it not good. I'm kind of rambling. I did read all of this. I really loved it. Then we have Full Metal Alchemist, which I did read the entire thing and absolutely loved it. I cried during this too. It's so good, guys. I have loved the anime since like middle school, both the original anime and the remake. It's this whole big story, but there's two versions. One came out in 2003, one came out in 2009. I didn't watch them until much later. I think I actually watched the 2003 one in like 2010, and then I didn't watch the 2009 one until I was in like college. But yeah, I finally read this, which I had read a bit of before, but I never read the whole thing, and it's just amazing. The art style, the storyline, the character work. If you are looking to get into manga and you enjoy fantasy elements, this is what I would recommend you pick up, because it's just so amazing. So I had a great time reading this. And then the last item on the list is one that I didn't read, so we're ending on a bit of a bummer, but that was Blue Exorcist, and this was the third option on the poll that I ran, and of course, like we've established, Blade of the Immortal won, so I didn't actually pick this one up, which I'm sad about because I do want to read it, but I'm also a little bit glad I didn't start it because this one's an ongoing series, and I'm trying to read finished complete series and not have a million ongoing things on my currently reading list, but it's fine. I will get to it one day, maybe after it's already finished. So of the 23 things on my list, I have completely read or started and decided to DNF 15 of them, so more than half. I think that goes out to like 65%-ish, if I'm remembering my math correctly, so pretty dang good. If we include Monster, which I started and then didn't read the rest of the volumes, but I did read a whole volume of, and Blade of the Immortal, which I also started but just didn't finish, that's 17 items, and that's like 74%, which I'm gonna round up to 75 and say that I got 3/4 of the way through my list. I think that's pretty good. I thought about going back to previous years' lists and seeing how much of a percentage I got through on those. I couldn't find the files on my computer very easily, so I'm like, yeah, whatever. I think I'm pretty much on par, because there has not been a year where I've read all of the items on my list, but I think 75% is a good estimate of how good I do each year. We'll see next year if I do better. Stay tuned for that video coming tomorrow, my 24 in 2024 list. It's a very good one. Very excited about that. But for now, we come to the end of this video, so if you've enjoyed it, please be sure to give it a big thumbs up. You can subscribe to my channel for more content, and that way I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye, everyone.